Today, we're diving into one of the most action-packed chapters you'll find anywhere, Matthew 14. Seriously, it's a wild ride. In just a handful of stories, we swing from the dark halls of political power to jaw-dropping miracles and then right into a life-or-death test of faith. So here's our game plan. We're going to break down the four major events in the order they happen. We start with a king who makes a deadly promise at a banquet. Then we see a miraculous meal for thousands. From there, we'll head out onto a stormy sea, and we'll wrap it all up with a powerful wave of healing. All right, so what's really interesting is that this chapter doesn't even kick off with Jesus. Nope. It starts in the court of a paranoid ruler, King Herod, a man who was absolutely haunted by something he did. Right off the bat, the tension is just palpable. When King Herod hears about all the amazing things Jesus is doing, his mind doesn't go to curiosity. It goes straight to terror. He's convinced it's the ghost of John the Baptist, a man he had killed, come back from the dead with superpowers. So you have to ask, why is a powerful king so freaked out? Well, the story immediately gives us the answer with a flashback. This isn't just some ghost story, it's the sound of a guilty conscience echoing in the halls of power. So here's the deal. The conflict was both political and deeply personal. John the Baptist had been calling out Herod in public for marrying his own brother's wife, Herodias, a huge scandal at the time. Herod wanted John gone, but he was stuck. The people loved John. They saw him as a prophet. So Herod was afraid if he killed John, he'd have a full-blown riot on his hands. And this whole situation explodes at Herod's birthday party. His stepdaughter puts on a dance, and Herod, probably caught up in the moment, makes a ridiculously rash promise in front of all his important guests. Well, her mother, Herodias, sees her chance. She tells her daughter exactly what to ask for. Suddenly, the king is trapped. His fear of looking weak in front of his court is bigger than his fear of the people. So even though he's distressed, he gives the order. John is killed. And from that dark, gruesome scene, the narrative does a complete 180. We leave the palace and its banquet of death and head out to a remote hillside where a totally different kind of feast is about to happen. So Jesus gets the news that his cousin John has been executed, and he tries to get away to be alone. But the crowds just won't let him. They follow him out into the wilderness. And instead of getting annoyed, he feels compassion for them and starts healing the sick. Now, as it gets late, the disciples come up with a very practical, logical plan. Hey, there's no food here, let's send everyone home so they can eat. Makes sense, right? But Jesus just looks at them and gives this completely impossible command. Nope, they don't need to go, you feed them. And this is what they have to work with. 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. I mean, it's almost comical. That's barely a lunch for one person, let alone a crowd of thousands. The gap between what they have and what they need is just massive. And the miracle itself is described with such simplicity. There are no lightning bolts or special effects, just 4 quiet, deliberate actions. He takes the little food they have, he gives thanks for it, he breaks it, and he hands it to the disciples to start passing around. Now here's where the scale of this thing just becomes mind-blowing. The text says they've fed 5,000 men, but then it adds that little detail, plus women and children. That means the actual number could have been 10, 15, maybe even 20,000 people. We're talking about the size of a small city. And here's the kicker. Not only did everyone eat until they were completely full, but they ended up with 12 baskets of leftovers. This feast is all about overwhelming abundance. It's the polar opposite of Herod's banquet, producing life and satisfaction, not death and regret. So right after this huge public miracle, the story suddenly zooms in. It gets intensely personal and, frankly, pretty terrifying. Jesus sends the disciples ahead in a boat, setting the stage for a private test of faith out on the stormy sea. So, picture this. It's the middle of the night. The disciples are miles from shore, getting battered by a huge storm. They're exhausted, they're scared, and then they see a figure walking toward them on top of the raging water. Their first reaction? Pure terror. They think it's a ghost. Jesus calls out not to be afraid. And then you've got Peter. Classic Peter, right? He yells out this incredibly bold, almost crazy challenge. It's this amazing mix of faith and doubt. He wants to believe so badly that he needs to test it in the most extreme way possible. And for a moment, the impossible happens. Jesus just says, "Come." And Peter climbs out of the boat, and he's doing it. He's actually walking on the water. It's this stunning moment where his faith is literally defying the laws of physics. But it doesn't last. The moment he takes his eyes off Jesus and looks at the storm, at the huge waves and the howling wind, that's when fear takes over. His focus shifts to his circumstances, and he immediately starts to sink.
Jesus grabs him, pulls him up, and then asks this incredibly piercing question. And it's really the whole point of the story. It's not so much a scolding as it is a lesson about that razor-thin line between faith and fear, and how doubt can pull us under even when we're in the middle of a miracle. Okay, so after all that high drama on the water, the chapter closes with one final, powerful scene. It sort of brings all the themes of faith and divine power back down to earth, but on a massive scale. When they finally make it to shore, the word spreads like wildfire. And what's so telling here is how people's faith has grown. They aren't asking for a big spectacle anymore. They're so convinced of his power that they just want to touch the hem of his cloak. And the text says that everyone who did was healed. Simple as that. So when you step back and look at Matthew 14 as a single connected story, you see this stunning contrast. You start with worldly power, Herod's power, which is built on fear, ego, and leads to a pointless death. And you end with divine power, which is revealed through compassion and faith and leads to life, abundance, and healing. So it leaves us with this big question. What is this chapter trying to tell us about the true nature of power itself? It's a question that echoes way beyond just this one story.